Well, here we go on side number 11. Larry, you've got me these tapes, and the initial pile that you got me was 2, 4, 6 of them with 2 sides on each, so I'm starting number 11, and I'm going to have to go over to Radio Shack and buy another package, because here we are prior to family and just into the military. So if you're still listening, anybody, God bless you for being so patient, listening to all this stuff about the DAC Junior's past. And I think I'll speak for a little while. I just talked to Howie, and it's a little bit cooler today on a Friday, July 1st, and we're going to meet at 1:45 in about an hour, but maybe I can sneak in a few things between now and then. Yes, went on to Lawton, got an apartment, nice spot, met some awfully nice people from various parts of the country, and as I say, one of our favorites was, whatever his name was, and Louise Palmer. We were well trained for about 3 or 4 months in the functioning of field artillery, anywhere from instructions in being a forward observer to being some kind of an officer at the gun location and the administration thereof. So it was a pretty concentrated course, and I did enjoy it. And I learned very well. I'll cover another activity later on in the tape. We were schooled mainly in the 2 main pieces of artillery, the 105 millimeter and 155 millimeter howitzers. 105 and 155 being the circumference of the shell. About that time, another very much larger piece of artillery, a 280 millimeter. Can you imagine the size of that? So it was almost twice as big as the 155. And errors do occur, and somebody either put too much of a charge or not enough of a charge in a 280 round gun emplacement, and it went astray. And I don't know as it killed anybody, but it sure raised a lot of hell in the Lawton, Oklahoma area, because I think it went beyond the firing range, and I'm sure somebody got hung on the whole deal. As I believe I said earlier, it was oftentimes in the military, because you get paid once a month, and we didn't plan too well for the last 5 or 6 days, so we had too much month at the end of our money. But on one of the occasions, and it was of course warm down there, we had as we often did, a picnic out in the back of this 10 or 12 unit apartment complex, where, as I say, we met the Palmers among other people, and had picnics and a few cases of beer. And I can recall very vividly on one occasion when Louise prepared a dish, in addition to hot dogs and hamburgers, for dip, and it was called chili con queso, and I think we used it as a dip. Well, after a few beers and somebody saying after the picnic, let's go to the drive-in. So we were all in agreement, and we went to the. Everybody ran upstairs or in their apartment to change their clothes into something. It doesn't make much sense, but while we were changing our clothes and in our all together, inspiration hit either one or both of us, and even though we heard calls from down on the ground floor, "Come on, you two, we know what you're doing," and they did know what we were doing, and the upshot of the whole thing was that we did everything in such a hurry, having been very careful prior to that. Donald was conceived. We didn't know it at the time and didn't pay much attention to it, or at least I didn't. Maybe Mom knew that she was ripe. But nevertheless, Donald was conceived after we had our fill of beer and chili con queso. Whatever his name was, and Louise had been called back into the military, having served, I think, in the Second World War, so they were a little bit older than we, the rest of us, and they had children. It did give me reason to question that when I got out of the military, whether or not I would get into the reserves or the National Guard, because here was a man who was uprooted from his town and from his job, whatever it was, and called back into the military during the Korean War. So that gave me pause. When I got out, I questioned whether I wanted to keep my military service active. And I don't think I did. I don't think I did want to. I'll tell you more about that later. In fact, I do recall that one of the officers that was training us at Bowling Green in the ROTC program, in talking with him and discussing things, he had an awning, canvas awning type of business that when he was in the reserves and National Guard, he too was called up and made an instructor at Bowling Green. I believe his rank was captain or major. But he was somewhat upset because I don't know whether somebody took over his business or whether he lost it, having to come back into the military. That too stuck in my mind as to what to do when I got out of the active military. There was always, when a person in the military's tour was up or they knew something new was going to happen, there was an awful lot of speculation as to who was going to go where. When we went in the military, I was assigned to the artillery school at Fort Sill. Larry Ward was assigned to Fort Campbell in Kentucky, so he went directly to a unit, and then I think he subsequently went to Fort Sill. We got orders to go from Lawton to, at that time, Camp Rucker, way down in the southern part of Alabama, near Dothan, Alabama. It has subsequently been designated Fort Rucker, a camp being a temporary military facility, and a fort being a permanent facility, where they now train because of the climate and the weather and all the advantages of that, and fairly flat down there. It is now the training location for helicopter pilots. Being such a small town, we looked and looked and looked. I think I said I bought a trailer in Oklahoma, and we filled up the car and filled up the trailer because we had acquired more material goods by that time. And off we went to Alabama. Drove through Dallas in the southern part of the country. In fact, we heard on the radio that there was a tornado, and being northerners and not that familiar with tornadoes and what they could do, we drove right through everything, and fortunately didn't get caught in that operation. Dothan, as I say, was a small town, and we were as broke as everybody else. And we found an apartment in town, which was kind of almost an in-law addition to a basic house. The basic house was being rented by a captain in the supply department. I think it was one of those pull-down beds, as I recall. So our living room and bedroom were the same. Unfortunately, as I say, Mom was pregnant by this time, and about the only location we could find was this adult or senior apartment attached to another house, but it was right next door to a gasoline station, and the gas being pumped there wasn't that bad, but boy, on Tuesdays or Thursdays or whenever the truck came to fill up the tanks was a day that a young lady who was pregnant and having enough trouble with keeping food down in the morning on Tuesday or Thursday or whenever it was, they filled up the tanks. She was a very unhappy camper. Just as an aside, our whole life may have taken a different direction had we not had beer and chili con queso, because we weren't planning for Mom to get pregnant. We were going to, I was going to go overseas, and she was probably going to go back to school and have another year of college, so that when I get home, she could finish up and we could go on from there. Get into that more later. An interesting, again, being a small town down in the south, it was, like so many small towns, had a roundabout in the center of town and a statue in the middle of this roundabout. And as I say, a very small town, very limited. But the statue, as a puzzlement to us, was to the boll weevil. And it was a statue to the boll weevil because, it being a large cotton-producing area, and the boll weevil having done such a devastating job on cotton plants, they had to find some other product to replace the devastation visited upon them by the boll weevil doing a job on the cotton. So what they did was move from cotton planting, harvesting, to peanut planting and harvesting. And so, even though they were devastated by what the boll weevil had done, they put up a statue to the boll weevil because it directed them to go in the peanut producing area as opposed to cotton. And another aside, I said there was a captain that lived in the main house, and at a time when, even though Mom was pregnant, at a time, and she knew this, his wife had the monthly curse, and so he tried to put a move on Mom. She became very disgusted. He felt very guilty about the whole thing, and because he was in supply, what it did for me was allow me to approach him and say, you know, I'm going to go to some cold weather areas, and what I sure would like would be one of those lined military heavy coats. It served me well, and he being in the supply area, he was able to provide it, and it maybe helped him with the guilty attempt to put a move on Mom. On our trip from Oklahoma to Alabama, again, we were always short of cash because we were paid $400 a month as a second lieutenant. And so we found a trailer camp. Not a motel, but those cabins, small cabins, so maybe a dozen of them. Well, we made arrangements to rent one, brought our suitcases into the place, changed our clothes or washed our face or whatever, and went on to have dinner. And by the time we got back, all we did was hear and see crickets. I mean crickets. And so I went to the owner, said I can't stay here, and he agreed to give me half my money back, and we went on to a more luxurious motel. And I think even in our suitcases, the crickets must have got in there because we still heard crickets in the room that we rented in a better motel. The hell with the cost. Maybe again, Larry, you were right. Leave some space. And I think I got the cart before the horse. I was talking about us being in Dothan, Alabama, and then talked about the trip from Oklahoma to Alabama. But piece it out, fast forward, rewind, cancel it, whatever you want. While we were in Dothan, Alabama, I think I talked about it. I had to get up fairly early and go to the firing range because I was, the officer in charge out at the range, and had to bring the young recruits out, and we had to teach them how to shoot a rifle, and with the targets, and keeping track of what their scores were after we had taught them how to shoot a gun. So I had to get up pretty early in the morning and leave poor Mom there by herself. I think she had the breakfast dishes done, and the laundry done and everything else by 8 o'clock. And then so she spent a fairly lonely day all day long. Things I subjected that poor woman to is legion. I think it was about this time that Clarence Kelly, Mom's dad, was going to buy a new car. And I think he did buy a big Oldsmobile or something along. I think it was a big black Oldsmobile. Well, anyhow, he couldn't get much for his Ford sedan. So I can't remember what the price was, maybe $500 or something like that, which was more than he could get from the dealer. And he was concerned about us. And so I think I must have made arrangements to fly up to Cleveland, get the car, maybe some kind of a vacation or leave or something along that line. Brought the Ford back to Alabama. And there was I put an ad in the paper, in the military journal or paper, or put a notice up on the board that I was willing to sell this 1939 Plymouth, and found another young man there who wanted the car. So I think I paid $500 for the Ford and sold the Plymouth for $300, something along that line. Well, as time progressed in our station at Camp Rucker in Dothan, Alabama, and the checkups that Mom had with expecting Don sometime the end of January, it became apparent that I was, and I think I already covered this regarding Russell and my postponement going to Korea till the end of January, early part of February. And so it became apparent that Mom had to go north because she couldn't drive and she couldn't fly, being X number of months pregnant. So somehow we got Mom up to Buffalo, and up to Buffalo, and I may have already mentioned this because Dad had a connection with a obstetrician who was willing to deliver the baby for X number of dollars, whatever it was. It was a son of a friend of his in Lodge. So up Mom went because Clarence and Lita didn't have any connections or know anybody that, you know, where they could have where she could have the baby in Cleveland. And I have a slight feeling that I've already covered this, but nevertheless I'll do it again. So anyhow, Mom went north, stayed with Mom and Dad, went to see the doctor, and I moved into the BOQ once we gave up our lease on this little apartment that we had. And I moved into the BOQ, Bachelor Officers Quarters, and it was fairly, it was a typical Army barracks. And I was up on the second floor, and I was down at one end of the BOQ, and there was another gentleman, another first lieutenant, I was a second lieutenant, who lived at the other end. And his apartment was, room was a good deal bigger than mine. And it didn't take a long time before, because we were the only two there, and we used to go to breakfast or lunch or dinner together. And I said, geez, why don't I move down in your place? You got plenty of room, and at least we can have some conversation. Or the man was from Boston. He was black. Just the nicest guy you'd ever want to talk to. We had a lot of nice conversations. And there was one incident that sticks out in my mind, and I now wish that I had kept track of who he was and what his address was, but I didn't. But nevertheless, we'd go to dinner, and we'd go to the officers' club and have dinner and have a couple pops, a couple beers. And one Sunday afternoon, I said to him, why don't we, instead of going to the officers' club, why don't we go into town and have dinner? Well, he looked at me like, you know, this is an incredulous proposal. And again, like my entering the back of the municipal bus, here was a friend of mine that we got along well together and talked together, and I said, let's go into town and have something to eat. Well, he stopped for a moment and said, Don, you realize I cannot go into town and have dinner. I have got to have dinner at the officers' club where there's no discrimination. And it struck me at that point how silly this whole thing was, but this was back in the early 50s. But he said to me afterwards, he said, Don, he said, you could not have paid me a nicer compliment than to suggest that you and I go into town and have dinner. You not seeing the color of my skin, not paying any attention to it, or the need to pay any attention to it, but thank you. And that still, to this day, in 50 years later, still sticks in my mind. Well, I'm back again. Another silly, excuse me, another silly thing that I did. I was due to leave Dothan, Alabama. Mom had already gone to Buffalo, seen the doctor and made arrangements. I was due to leave on January 1st. I was supposed to stay in Dothan until 12/31. Well, I was anxious to get home and see Mom and my parents. And instead of signing out, which you had to do in the military, you had to sign out at a certain date and time and hour. I left on 12/31, maybe 6 o'clock in the evening, and had a friend of mine sign me out at 12:01 on January 1st, 1954. So I got a head start of 6 hours going north. How far I got in those 6 hours, I don't have any idea, but I was driving the Ford that I acquired from Clarence. But, you know, had something happened, had I had some kind of an accident on the way north, which could have happened obviously on New Year's Eve, I would have been in deep doo-doo. My orders, as I mentioned before, were extended from the end of December to go to Korea to the early part of February. I think it was the 5th, 6th, 7th of February 1954. As Don knows, after I got home, and Don, you were being born, how painful it was for Mom, and not equally painful for me, but my pain for her was as much pain, I guess, as I had experienced up to that time. But there wasn't much else I could do except hold her hand, and every time she had a pain, run and get the nurse, and the nurse was getting kind of sick and tired of me. But Donald, you were born good size, 8 pounds something. I think you did a little tearing on Mom's vitals, and I think at the same time, the pressure from the birth or from you, I think you broke her tailbone, Don, the coccyx, which took a while to heal. But at least we had a week in Buffalo after you were born, and tried to help her out as much as I could. My mother made a suggestion that if I sat down and wrote little tray slips or notes, gave them to my mother, she would put them in various places, whether under the dish at the dinner time or breakfast, or in the bathroom, or under her pillow, or whatever have you, just to know that I was thinking about her. And I think Mom stayed there in Buffalo February, March, and April, I think it was. And then, as we prearranged, she'd spend 3 months in Buffalo and 3 months in Cleveland. And I believe it worked out pretty well, because the folks still had the cottage up there at Sunset. So Mom stayed in Cleveland with Donald until April or May, or maybe even June. I'm not quite sure. But it was good timing, because when Donald and Mom left Cleveland for Buffalo, the family, Mom and Dad, my mother and Dad, were up at Sunset, so at least Mom and Donald could spend the summer at the beach, in the sand and near the water, and enjoyed themselves. Clarence was always, when Mom and Donald were in Cleveland, always woke up early. I don't think he added anything to your losing weight, Donald, because he enjoyed bacon, and he would get up and he would cook.
That was the original on you.
He would cook bacon and you were sitting in a high chair, and he'd give you one or two pieces all broken up, and you used to love that. It sure wouldn't fit in your meals today, but your grandfather Kelly really spoiled you. Whatever date it was that Mom and Donald and Clarence and Lolita left Cleveland to bring you to Sunset, took an hour off the drive from Cleveland to Parkhurst, and I don't think my mother had any conception of how big you were, Donald, because she had a crib with phone conversations and so on. Yes, I got a high chair, bring a high chair, and I got a crib and what. Well, anyhow, when the four of them arrived from Cleveland at sunset, here was this crib that my mother had that was almost like a doll crib. Well, Clarence, being the compassionate person that he was, said, oh, because he didn't bring the crib from Cleveland because Mom said she had one. So nevertheless, when Clarence saw that crib, he says, my grandson is not going to sleep in that thing. He's not even going to be able to roll over. So God bless him. He got back in the car, left Lolita, Mom, and Donald there at sunset, and he drove back to Cleveland, disassembled the crib, put it back in the car, drove back to Sunset. I can't recall now, but I hope they stayed overnight as opposed to having to make 2 round trips from Cleveland to Buffalo. But his nose was out of joint, and I think he let my mother know that toy doll crib was not something that his grandson was going to sleep in. In those first few months of 1954, when Mom and Donald were in Buffalo, Douglas was having a real problem. He was not that much of a student, and he was failing math. Well, he was sure he was going to fail until Mom, Betty Jane, who was good at math, she was good at everything, and I'll get to that in a minute. She sat down with Doug every evening and brought him up to speed in math to a point where I can't recall his grade when he took the exam, but it was in the 90s. Now, the teacher who knew what his capabilities were, even though the tests that he took in the springtime were improving because of Mom's tutoring, Doug passed the exam, as I say, with somewhere in the 90s. Well, the teacher was furious. He was thoroughly convinced that he had a copy of the exam. He had somehow got a hold of it and had the answers, and he raised quite a big stink. And I think it was finally resolved when it was made known that Mom was coaching, tutoring Doug, and brought him up to speed with math, and he passed with flying colors. While we're on the subject of Betty Jane, of Mom, it's probably as good a time as any to give you a little background that I learned when I was romancing her, because we met, as I said, in April or May. We became engaged in November. We were married the following March. I didn't even know her a whole year when we were married. Nevertheless, her parents both worked. They lived in Raleigh, and I think the company, construction firm that Clarence worked for, transferred him to Norfolk. That's how they ended up in Norfolk. Mom was an excellent student. As I mentioned with the math and Doug, she also had taken 5 years of Latin. I took 2 semesters and flunked it both times. She was quite, as you all know, quite an artist, not only in her stitching, but also her charcoals, her paintings, whether it was oils or watercolor. She was just an excellent student. At some point, the contractor that Clarence worked for had secured a job in Saudi Arabia, and there was some thought given to Clarence and Lita and Betty Jane moving to Saudi Arabia for his work. How that would have ever worked out, I don't know. Whether Mom, Betty Jane, would have done the same thing she did in high school, I don't know. Her best friend, Alice Vaughn, and she spent an awful lot of time together, both at school, on dates, as you'll see in photographs downstairs, and when it came time for Clarence to be transferred to Cleveland, your mother and your grandmother, Betty Jane, said, well, maybe you're going to Cleveland, but I'm not. So her best friend, Alice Vaughn, and the Vaughn family agreed to let Betty Jane stay with them for her senior year. What a tragedy it would have been if she had moved to Cleveland and had to spend her senior year without her friends and all the surroundings. They lived together, played together, studied together, just like sisters. And I think this is something that Betty Jane really missed, not having any other family other than her parents and a cat. And this is why I think she wanted she wanted 4 boys, not 3. And it was me that said no. When the Vaughns agreed to house and watch over Betty Jane for her senior year, I'm sure Clarence and Lolita paid Alice's parents some monies to cover some of her expenses. Mom was a very popular young lady there in Norfolk. They used to travel to McClellanville, Sullivan's Island, and there was some other location north of there that they used to go and spend time with Grunk's family and his kids, the Stanlins. And Mom used to tell stories about always loving to go to a spot out in the boonies where they served crab. A very, very small skillet was full of crab. And I'll tell you a funny story about that later. But they had the opportunity to play with Richard, and I think Russell was the youngest, and Bubba is all I can think of. I'm sure if I went downstairs I could think of the third boy's name. I think he was the middle one, and he was named Bubba, as was our Bubba. Mom used to tell stories about them taking a watermelon and somehow drilling a hole in it, and then taking a bottle of gin or vodka, and after they took the plug out, they'd fill the watermelon with gin or vodka, put the plug back, let the watermelon absorb the liquor, and then they drink it or eat it later. Drink or eat, either way. And it was probably at a party similar to this that when Alice and Betty Jane got home, they were both 17 or 18, and shouldn't have been able to drink till you were 18, but they obviously did down on the beach. And I think both girls got sick by the time they got home after the party. And they both, my recollection is that they both threw up someplace downstairs before they went upstairs to the bedroom. And God bless Alice's father. She said, "Go on, girls, go on up and, get in your pajamas or nighties and get in bed. I'll take care of this." And God bless him. He cleaned up that mess downstairs. And maybe Alice's mother found out about it, maybe not, I don't know. But he was a prince of a guy. They both went to Larchmont High School, right nearby. I think it was within walking distance for both Alice and Mom when she was in the apartment. But obviously, they went together after they were rooming together during their senior year. And I think both of them had, in addition to the other talents that they had, both had good voices. And I think, I'm not sure what Alice was, but I know Mom was an alto. And being in a Navy town, it made a lot of sense. The two of them, it didn't take them long to figure out that if they sang in the choir at the naval and Marine base, they'd be exposed to additional young men, in addition to the ones that they knew and dated in high school. There's a whole bunch of pictures downstairs regarding parties that they went to, dances that they went to, but this was just one other way to meet young men, is singing in the choir. So she was talented in that respect also. Somewhat of a sad note was that I found out subsequently that Betty Jane, my wife, called her mother. For some reason, there was some conflict, maybe, mother and daughter, whatever have you. She called Marion, called my mother Mom. She called her mother Mother. How sad. Getting to the end of this tape, and instead of stopping here, I'll just keep rambling on. Well, early part of February 1954, I boarded a plane in Buffalo for Vancouver, British Columbia. We arrived in British Columbia for a short stay when we got on another plane, and it was headed to Japan by way of Alaska. We were able to get off in Alaska in April. Yes, it was cold, but it was just a quick stopover, so we stopped over and got back on the plane and flew into, I'm pretty sure it was Tokyo. We only stayed a day or so in Tokyo when we got on a train and went to what was the Japanese Naval Academy on an island east of the main island in Japan. I think we spent 3-4 days, maybe a week there, being trained because of the concerns at the time in biological, chemical, and nuclear information as part of our training before we went further south to, I think, Yokohama. And I don't think we took we might have either flown to Korea or taken a ship. I'm not quite sure. But everybody's orders were different, and everybody was going to a different location. And my recollection is that we went to Busan, South Korea, and they gathered everybody together, and in hopes of reminding them of home, they had singers and comedians, but anyhow, the singer sang heart-rendering songs. And most of the people, as I looked around, including myself, had tears in their eyes because we were remembering what we had left and where we were going. A comedian subsequently came on and he told jokes, tried to get us to laugh, and everybody sat there in a very somber mood, and he finally got pissed that nobody was laughing at his jokes. And he wanted to exit the stage, but he had a job to do, and he tried to do it, but nobody responded. Again, there are pictures downstairs showing my Tokyo, Yokohama, Busan, and trip up the Korean Peninsula to the unit that I was assigned to. I was assigned to the 24th Division, 63rd Field Artillery Battalion, which was way up north, right close to the DMZ. And I believe my first assignment was what we call S2, which is Intelligence Officer. To get clearance for that, the FBI had to be notified that I needed clearance for top secret or secret clearance. And so folks back in Kenmore, and I think maybe even at Bowling Green, were queried, the neighbors, friends, because I was being